I would like to introduce our next speaker. Armands is our friend from Latvia and also a wizard who has 10 years of IT experience in different fields, and he's going to tell you all about it right now.
Hi, I'm Armands, and it doesn't matter who I am because, in my opinion, if you like what I'm saying or if you're interested in what I'm saying, it doesn't matter what I do, what's my kind of background and so on. And if you're not, then it doesn't matter either. But since my company I work for, Proof IT, graciously let me come here, so it's a really cool company. And if you work with insurance or for insurance company, then after this talk, come to me and we'll talk about different stuff. Otherwise, today I want to tell you about the greatest book on IT and on management and on Agile that I've ever read. There are, but first of all, I guess I need to give a disclaimer. This is more of an inspirational talk. I will be really, really amazed if you find something new here. But what I do hope for is that you will go away inspired to do at least one thing differently today from what you see in this talk. Why I started this is because IT is a very, very fashion-conscious industry. I'm not sure if you kind of, if you've noticed that, but I have the socks to prove it. So. IT is a very fashion-conscious industry, and every once in a while there's a trend coming in. Like, I don't know, Agile, it will solve all your problems. Famously, I think Java had the slogan, Java is the answer, what's the question? Or microservices is the new sort of black. And so what I set out to do, I set out to find the one book that will solve all your problems instantly. Like that. Since I don't like to talk at people, I will try to engage you in some talking for yourself. Any guesses about what's the best book on IT that you've read? Have you read any books on IT? Any good ones? Yeah, that's a good one, yeah, but not the best one. Any more guesses? No? Okay. Yeah? Yeah. I also like that one. But I lean toward, and I think both of them mentioned are not really technical books. And I'm really glad to see that at Agile conferences, there's more and more emphasis on actually people and psychology. And that's what interests me in general, because for technical talks, for specific topics like how to introduce Scrum or Kanban or whatever, if you have a good, motivated team with smart people that are there to solve the problems, they are the best people to say how to solve a specific problem. Not some abstract talker at a conference like me, because I don't know your specific troubles. I don't know your specific limitations, and why haven't you done the things that I have done? And the fact that something worked for me doesn't necessarily work for you. So my advice is find the best people you can, put them in the best environment you can, and they will produce some results as a team. So, but you have to start with yourself. Because it's no need, it's impossible to motivate someone if you're not motivated yourself and if you basically don't understand what's going on. So that's where kind of psychology comes in. And with psychology, there are certain like stereotypes or types of people or personas that we're talking about. If you have been working at big companies, or for example with government institutions where there are a lot of people, I'm sure you've met some of these like personas. I'm sure you've met somebody that's become a project manager just because they have been long enough in a certain place. Like they've been good developers, but time passed and it's been 10 years, so they need a promotion, so they promote them to a project manager. Some are good project managers, so some aren't that good. Then there are solution architects. Sitting in their big ivory towers using big words like leveraging synergies across the platform that they themselves maybe have a vague idea of what that means. Then there are the old school IT guys that still think that like working from a console is the best way to work. And there are like kind of these all different personas. Sounds familiar? Yes, no, we're bored. Okay, good. So this book is about those personas. It's Winnie-the-Pooh. Why? I will explain. Of course, I'm from a generation where Winnie-the-Pooh didn't look like that. He looked like this. So this is the correct type of Winnie-the-Pooh, not the Disney one, not the original one. This is the correct one. So this Winnie-the-Pooh, in my opinion, is representation of this project manager that has been promoted out of his league, and he kind of understands that he's a bear of little brain. But he tries to make the best of what he's got, of his kind of team and adventures, and most of the time he succeeds. And if he doesn't, he learns from it. Then there's a systems architect, because Owl likes to use big words. And kind of all the animals know that, I think it was EEYEORE that said that Owl really doesn't have any brain. But still, they come to consult the great oracle Owl, because A, Owl can spell, B, Owl lives in the biggest house in the woods. Then there's systems administrator that's probably locked up somewhere in a dank room, and he's really unhappy, and he's about the old school ways, and like I had a system administrator that was like refusing my to put my Apple computer in a local network because they are just evil. And so EEYEORE is excellent representation, and he said once that he's not at all thrilled about that washing behind the ear nonsense, because it will only get you sick. So then there's the junior developer, and Piglet is a small animal, and as Piglet once said, it's really hard to be brave when you're just a small animal. And it's the same I think with junior developers, because I remember when I first started working, I was so scared to do something wrong, when in fact, now I learned that IT is one of those few industries where you actually can be wrong. And sometimes you're even encouraged to be wrong, to stumble upon something new. Because imagine a surgeon experimenting on you when you're like on the surgical table. It doesn't really work that way. We can make mistakes unless you kind of have a bug in I don't know, plane navigation system. It's pretty safe. Nobody's going to die from that. So I think it's IT is kind of good like that. And there's the rabbit. That's the smart developer, and he's sometimes overly smart, but he gets things done, and he kind of looks after Pooh a little bit so he doesn't get too fat, and so on. So these are the personas. I didn't spot it in the very beginning, and how I came about this is I was in my office kitchen, and we have a bookshelf there. And there's a book that's called A Quote from the Pooh for Every Day of the Week or something like that. And one of the programmers came in and he asked me a question about unit testing. I don't remember what the exact question was, but I just randomly opened the page in the book and it said, it's a rough translation from Latvian, but roughly what it said, you should do the things that you should do, and the things that you shouldn't, you just shouldn't do. So that was my answer to his question, what he should do about the unit testing. And that's kind of it, and it all started as a joke, but then I decided to reread the book about Winnie the Pooh, and my suspicions were true. Why? Because chapter 1, in which we are introduced to Winnie the Pooh and the adventures start, the one quote that I think is used ad nauseum, and I've used it in my presentations almost every time when I talk about organizational transformation or introduction of Agile into the company, is the very first lines from the book. And it says, here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs, bump, 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 on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. But sometimes he feels that there's really is another way. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it, and then he feels that perhaps there isn't. Anyhow, he's at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. So this is a syndrome I see over and over again about companies that are too busy working to actually think of better ways to work. And actually, how many of you consider you work in companies that do some sort of Agile? Or Agile companies for that matter? Okay, okay, good. How many of those that work in those companies you have slack in your daily working lives? A lot less. So I would venture to go as far as to say that those of you that work in the companies that do Agile and you don't have any slack, when is the time to innovate? When is the time for agility? When is the time to think about how you could work better? So slack is very, very important. And as this quote from Milnes shows, if you bumping your head all the time, you don't have the time to think about different ways of movement. But getting back to our story, this story is famously about how Winnie the Pooh goes to the big tree and sees some bees there, and he tries to get honey, then he falls off a tree, goes back to Christopher Robin, gets the balloon, and floats up to the bees. Actually, what it's about, it's a story in which we are introduced to concepts of agility and importance of planning. Of course, agility and planning in the same sentence, you will ask me, are you mad? And I will say, perhaps. But sometimes agility and planning is shown opposed to each other. But really, I don't see that there's a contradiction. And I think nobody should, because some sort of planning and reacting to change does not mutually exclude each other. Let's see the story. So basically what our project manager does, he goes to a tree or a sales opportunity, as you might have, in which there's honey to be had. He tries to get up a tree, fails miserably, and devises a plan to go back to Christopher Robin's house, get a balloon, pretend he's a cloud, and float up to the sales case and try to get the honey that way. And Christopher Robin, in this story, is a CIO. Why? Because not only does he get the balloon, which is what needs to be done in Winnie the Pooh's plan, but he also gets a gun, just in case, as you would. And if any of you have been in any sort of hard contract negotiations whatsoever, of course you know that you need to have a gun with you. or rather you have to be prepared. One colleague of mine said that in any sort of negotiations, the side that is the most prepared wins. So I'm not saying bring a gun to the knife fight, but if you know that you're going to have a hard situation at work or with your client or whatever, be as prepared as you can. So what does this illustrate? It illustrates, first of all, that Winnie-the-Pooh as a project manager had an initial plan. That plan didn't work. He had a second plan. So he goes up to the bees with the balloon, singing the song, and then he realizes that those are actually the wrong kind of bees. What does he do? He reverts. So he rolls back everything that he has done. He says to Christopher Robin that you need to shoot the balloon, otherwise bad things will happen. And Christopher Robin, in that particular moment, says, but if I shoot the balloon will break. And Winnie-the-Pooh says, well, if you don't shoot the balloon, I will break. So in this situation, what is important that you have to make instinctive and immediate decisions. Even though sometimes they go completely against your initial plan. Even though sometimes you need to sacrifice something. I had this experience. I was driving in a car with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about a specific project we had. And he said, if I ever encounter that idiot that wrote architecture for this specific project, I would kick his ass. And I said, well, here I am. This particular case was we had a system that was we had a client portal that was built in Ruby on Rails, and they needed an addition. At that time, we didn't have any Ruby on Rails developers. We couldn't outsource them. We couldn't get them from other companies or find them in the market. So, but we had plenty of Java developers. So at that point, I decided, okay, having no product at all is worse than having a product with sort of crappy architecture in this specific moment. So I decided, okay, we will build an add-on in Java. In hindsight, absolutely idiotic idea. So we had different technologies, we had problems with integration and so on, but at that specific moment, it was the only thing to do. And this is what I tell people I work with, that however stupid the decision, sometimes it had concrete grounds on which to build. And maybe looking back at that decision, it's absurd, but still kind of try to get in the shoes of those people that made that decision and find out what was the rationale behind that. As you can see, I'm safe here and he didn't kick my ass, so everything is good. So this is the story of planning that we can see. Clearly, Winnie-the-Pooh, as the project manager, did some planning. He clearly was agile enough to A, climb a tree, B, navigate a balloon, and C, then change his plans according to the situation and adapt to the specific situation. So that's the one story, that's the first story linked to IT in Winnie-the-Pooh. The second one is in which Winnie-the-Pooh goes and gets into a tight place. So it's a story about how Winnie-the-Pooh goes to see the rabbit, eats too much, and gets stuck, right? Everyone knows that. Basically, it's a story about bloated products and analyzing data. I will start from the end about analyzing data, and I'm sorry if this kind of if this talk is a little bit disjointed, because that's the way Milne wrote the book, and I have nothing to do with it. So first, about importance of analyzing data. In Agile conferences, there's a new kind of trend that's been going on for quite a while, where you take a thing that works, like for example metrics, and you put an O in front of it, and no metrics is the new kind of deal that everyone should do. what it really, I kind of don't really grasp the concept of null metrics, but what I think it says that you should look at the right things, at the right data, at the right metrics, rather than trying to measure everything, which is called metrics. So how Winnie-the-Pooh uses metrics in this specific story. He comes to a rabbit hole and he says, "Rabbit, are you there?" And the voice says, "Nope." He said, "Is anybody home?" "Nobody." And then Winnie-the-Pooh tries to analyze the data. And he goes, "Okay, there has to be somebody that said nobody." And it's one thing that that sometimes people that analyze the data, the one step that they make is that they try to go on a hunch and see that, okay, for example, we have a lot of bugs in the system. What's wrong? I don't know, we need to refactor some piece of code. While they haven't actually looked into the data that is supporting that claim. And numeric data is important, and also kind of the non-numeric data is also as important, but I will talk about that a little bit later. So in this case, why data analysis is important is because if the Pooh didn't come to the conclusion that there has to be somebody that said nobody, he wouldn't get any honey. The second kind of part of the story is about the bloated products. I think the analogy is very obvious because Pooh has too many honey and he cannot get out of the rabbit hole. Now, I don't know how many of you launch your products or clients' products regularly, but I had quite some experience with launches, and the one thing that I find common is when you build a product for a new client, they want as much as possible in that specific product. Why? Because emergency. What if something happens? And IT is very often compared to engineering sciences, specifically buildings. And we know that the larger house you have, the better. If you have like a road that's just going one lane in one direction, it's good. But a road with 3 lanes in each direction is better, right? And that's what we're said, that IT is part of the engineering sciences. And there's actually a really, really amazing talk by Dan North called Beyond Features, where he compares IT to surgery. Why? Because I had a surgery a month ago or something. And my initial reaction to when I came to the doctor with a broken arm, and he said, "Well, we'll need to put you under a knife." My first reaction was, "Is there any other way? Because I don't want to have the surgery." And he said, "Well, there isn't, so I had to have one. But for business, involving IT is kind of the same. Why? Because if they could solve the specific problem in any other way, with their own means, without explaining to those number crunching guys that they don't have common language with what they need to kind of convey and what their problem is, they would do that. And oftentimes I find that when we act, imagine if IT were doctors. So a client comes to you and he says, "Well, my arm hurts. What should I do?" And you say, "Well, what do you think you should do?" I don't know, maybe the situation is different here, but it's in a lot of companies in Latvia that we're kind of expecting an IT solution from a client rather than being professionals and providing the solution. But going back to the bloated products. So what happens? The mindset of having more is better. You don't go into the surgery and saying, "Okay, if you need to operate on my arm, really, you know, I think I have big ears, so you could also cut those off a little bit." No, you don't. But when you buy a product, you say, "Okay, I want this feature and this feature and this feature, and why don't you throw that one and that one and that one in, just because we're paying you?" And then is the case when the project is too large and there are features that, essential features that are not working, and you cannot push that huge bear into production because it's stuck. And you need to either trim down the features or you need to convince the users that they are not essential. So it's a question of a minimal viable product. What's the minimal thing that you can push to production and have already something's paying off, rather than waiting for everything to be working and then launching the product. So I think this is the clear case of pushing the product, a really fat, bear-shaped product into production. The third chapter, in which Pooh and Piglet go hunting and nearly catch a WOOZLE. This is, I guess, a little less known, but this is one of my favorite stories. So the story goes that Winnie-the-Pooh meets the piglet, and they go around, they find tracks around a tree, and they decide that they will hunt that animal down. And the more they go around the tree looking for the tracks of the animal, the more animals there are. And so they go once around the tree, there are 2 tracks, they go another time, and there are 4 tracks, and so on. What this really is the story about refactoring, or rather how we introduce bugs into the system. My previous example of we think that there are some sort of bugs in the system, what we need to do, we need to refactor something. Well, first of all, analyze where the bugs are coming from. And I'm quite convinced that IT systems are not organic systems. So they do not decay on their own other than performance. If there are any bugs in the system, A, it's user errors, B, it's data errors, C, most likely it's errors introduced by programmers while making the new features. So what we do, we go around the tree, we lay down the tracks, and then we go around the tree a second time and we say, who wrote all this shit code? It's horrible, we need to refactor it. And we go around the tree again and find even more tracks. And this is a story, if you do not cover your own tracks, or rather if you do not leave the space behind you or the code behind you clean, you will always find those tracks. And then at a certain moment you will say, okay, there are too many tracks here, we need to build a new system. Where there's a good, it's called the Boy Scout principle. What I try to kind of preach to people I work with, even if you open the code, you just need to look at it, you don't need to alter it. And you see a way to improve it, do it. But again, you can do it only if you have Slack. Because if you have urgent pressing matters with you, you don't have the time for that. The second part of the story is that Winnie-the-Pooh, our project manager, brings Piglet with him. And he's kind of mentoring the Piglet to be brave and telling about the woozles and weasels or whatever those animals are called. And mentoring, I think, is one of the most important things that you can do in your professional career. Why? It's for the same reason that I'm talking at this conference. My hope is that somebody will later ask me a question and that I have never thought about. And I will have to kind of think about something in a new way, just as I'm trying to illustrate that you can get inspiration from a children's book in your daily life. I will need to think in a new way and to kind of figure out the answer to that question that would have never arose if I wasn't here. And so the story of how Winnie-the-Pooh coaches the piglet, I really like the times that I have the chance to either be mentored or to mentor somebody. Because it's really gratifying to see people grow with you, and it's a lot easier to grow with someone. And I'm really grateful that I had mentors, not just in the name, but people that I just work with that I learned from a lot. And in that case, self-reflection is really, really important. So you need to be open with those people. you need to learn from them, and you need to, again, analyze the data. So, again, I will try to talk to you, the very talkative audience today. How many of you have the some set career path that you talk to your either manager or your owner or your company owner or something like that? Okay, not a lot. So what are other people doing? So do you know where you will be, what you need to learn to improve as a professional? Yeah, a couple of people. Thank you. Okay, so my idea is that I regularly try to ask my clients and my coworkers, what is the way I can improve myself for them to be more comfortable working with me. Because I have been working in IT for more than 10 years now, and I kind of have this idea in my head how I should be working, and it's wrong. Why? Because this idea is more than 10 years old. So the same people that put up the hand or other people, who of you in the last half a year asked your colleague, how can I adjust my behavior, or how can I improve my professional knowledge to help you work with me better? A lot more. Very good. Keep doing that, because for me, I think it's very, very important. And ask your client how you can improve their experience with you working with them. So the fourth story is a story in which Eeyore loses a tail. So Eeyore loses a tail, owl finds it, puts it on the doorbell, and yeah, that's kind of the basic story. So what it really is about is how important are tools. What's another animal's doorbell is other animal's tail. I had this absolutely absurd experience with one company I worked with. They bought some sort of a very expensive tool because the salesperson was really, really good. But they had no idea what to do with that tool. So I was kind of trying to make the architecture for their software, and they said, well, can we put it here? No, it doesn't really work that. Well, can we make it do this? No, it's not meant for that. But still, they tried to shoehorn that specific thing in that specific software architecture. Same goes with the processes. Again, sometimes we try to introduce Kanban where it doesn't work. Sometimes Scrum doesn't work. And we assume that if it doesn't work in a specific environment, it doesn't work at all. And then you have these claims that, well, Agile is not really working. Agile is about agility. Agile is about reacting to change and doing things that make the most sense in a specific environment. So for me, in a specific environment, if I need to do waterfall for some sort of limitations, and I will tell about those later, I will do that. And I will not consider myself less agile. So, chapter 5, in which Piglet meets a heffalump, and I'm going a little bit over time than I expected. So this is the story about importance of focus group personas and user stories. So basically the story is about how Piglet and Winnie-the-Pooh go to catch a heffalump, and they discuss how to catch it. So Winnie-the-Pooh says that the most important thing is how you can lure the heffalump is with honey, and Piglet thinks that it's acorns. If you're building a new product and you're a startup or just building generally a new product, you should know your focus groups. And if you are building a product for bears, you can lure them with honey. But if you're building a product for heffalumps, I don't know how they can be lured. So this, and I have experience with companies that write user stories having a specific personas in mind. They know that they are building software for Jake or whatever, looking from the list, the most popular name in Lithuania is Vaidas, so they're building software for Vaidas. So they know that Vaidas is roughly 30 years old. He drives a Volvo. He likes safety, and he has 3 children. And that is very important when you're building software. To personify, and it not only makes it easier, it also makes it a lot more fun. Like we had the shipping, built a shipping software for a shipping company, and we had a person called Pablo, which was smuggling drugs, and we built all the user stories around Pablo. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot more fun than just writing general user stories. And then there's a story in which EEYEORE has a birthday and gets 2 presents. Again, the story is that Winnie the Pooh has a pot of honey. Piglet has a balloon. They try to give it to EEYEORE, but on the way, naturally, Winnie the Pooh eats the honey, and Piglet smashes the balloon. So what the story is really about? The story is about integration efforts. I don't know how many of you worked on the integration project, but usually you kind of have the specification in the beginning. You agree with all the sides involved, and then those specifications kind of morph, and everything works on your side, everything works on other companies' side or on other departments' side, but when you try to put them together, somehow it doesn't really function. In this case, the broken balloon fit perfectly into the pot, so it's a success story. But the specifications in the end were drastically different from what was there in the beginning. And sometimes, especially if you have integrations projects, specifications are important. And again, there are no contradictions to Agile. A colleague of mine had a project working with NATO, and very secret project, but some information wasn't a secret. And basically, they only had small chunks of information around all the countries. And within the team, they had agile processes, they had some sort of Scrum implemented and so on, but the output needed to be specifically as it said in the specification. Why? Because otherwise it wouldn't work. So integration is one of those things where you need to have specifications. Then there's a chapter which Kanga and Baby Roo come to the forest and all the other animals are scared of them, which are classical case of Indian subcontractors coming in and taking your job. Then, of course, there's the famous case in which Christopher Robin leads the expedition to the North Pole, which is basically a CIO taking up a very ambitious development effort that nearly gets everyone killed. Then there's a story in which Piglet is entirely surrounded by water, and I couldn't kind of get the analogy there, but there's one quote that I really, really like. Winnie the Pooh says, Christopher Robin, well, come and see my boat. And Christopher Robin says, okay, let's go see it. And he says, well, it's not really a boat. And Christopher Robin asks, how it's not a boat? Well, sometimes it's a boat, and sometimes it's a disaster. And it really depends if I'm on top of it or underneath it. And it really kind of reminded me of deployments. Sometimes this is successful and sometimes it's an utter disaster. And the final chapter in which Christopher Robin gives Pooh a party is basically about how you should, as an analyst, how you should first listen to your client telling the story rather than having some assumptions. So this story is not about Winnie the Pooh. This is a drawed out story about how, in my opinion, you should look at things. In the second book, there's this quote that says, opposite of an introduction is a contradiction. So there is a contradiction in my initial statement. I cannot recommend one, I cannot recommend two, I cannot recommend 100 books for you to read. Whatever you can get your hands on, if you have enough inspiration, if you look at it in a specific light, you can draw from it. You can apply it to your professional career and become a better professional. The story that comes to my mind, I went to the theater. And I don't remember what the play was, but there was a guy having small bits of paper in his pocket. And he was walking and he threw them up and it looked like snow. And I thought, wow, all these CGIs in the movies, and you actually only need to throw up pieces of paper, and it does look like snow. And what I did, on Monday I came back to work, and the first thing I did, I simplified the report that I was working on, which had like 17 pages. It was a project steering report, and I narrowed it down to 3. Why? Because A, nobody were reading 17 pages. B, it was more simple, more accessible, and it didn't require as much resources from my side. So what I want you to do is think of one thing that you will do differently today after this presentation, or tomorrow, or on Monday, or whatever. One concrete thing that you will try to step out of your comfort zone, look at things differently, and get inspiration from somewhere unexpected. Maybe you should look at more presentations online. Maybe you should read more books. For example, Winnie-the-Pooh, very good one. Maybe you should see more conferences on Agile or on any other topics. Or maybe you should see a cartoon and just for the laughs, try to apply the logic that you learned there to your professional life and see how it works. But I think that my talk would be successful if at least a part of you would go home and think of one thing that you will do differently to become a better professional. That's it.
Okay, we have time for one question. Anyone? Any questions to Armands? Okay.
What other great books you considered while preparing for this?
For me, I think that from the top of my head, making good teams great, I think, was one already mentioned about the retrospectives that I really, really like. There's a book by Dan Ariely called Predictably Irrational that deals with psychological kind of things, how people think and how people work. One that I recently read was Confessions of a Public Speaker. I don't remember the name of the author, but they're like any book. If you can take one tiny bit from it, even if the learning that you get from it is, I will never ever read the book by that specific author, that's already a thing that you will learn, and you will understand, and ideally you will analyze and think why this book does not apply to you, why it's not interesting, why it's boring or whatever. So yeah, at least 3 books off the top of my head, most of them not technical.